Good morning. It's always a pleasure to attend Grace Hopper celebration of women in computing because we get to see so many women technologists at one place, right? All of us, I think, have had the experience of being the minority, at our workplaces. And as, Kavita was mentioning, not audible? Better? No. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to say it again. It's a pleasure to see so many women in computing at one place, and that's the reason why Grace Hopper celebration of women in computing is my all-time favorite event to participate in. And it's nice to see it's nice to also see some diversity in the room, and thanks to the gentlemen who are attending here today. So the topic we're going to talk about today is blockchain, building trust one link at a time. Trust. Every day, armies of these, and they're called army ants, travel through the jungle searching for new foraging ground, okay? And as they march, they also perform some unbelievable logistical feats that would really make a 4-star army general proud. And what is really interesting, and why did I put up this particular picture for trust? It's very simple. There is no leader here. There is no ant that is an architect that is going to actually tell people how you're going to actually construct these body build bridges. Okay, if you notice, the ants are creating a body bridge to bridge this gap. Okay, no single leader, no architect. And what is even more fascinating is that each individual ant is practically blind. Okay, and it has such a minuscule brain that I don't think it can even begin to fathom the kind of collective movement that is actually taking place here. Okay? And for me, this was an enduring image of trust, because while there is no idea about, how long this bridge is, how much of traffic is, happening out here, each ant is cognizant of only the local connections. What is the link to the ant before it, the one after behind it, the one that is walking over it, or the one that it is walking over? Okay? As simple as that. And these are the simple rules by which they are collaborating and deciding, in terms of what is possible and what is not possible. So New Jersey Institute of Technology has done some great research to find that it is all maths at the end of it all, okay? And the algorithm that these ants use have actually evolved, through generations of ants. And why that makes it so interesting for me is, if this is the evolution that we have seen with ants, how has trust evolved with human beings, okay? So a very long time ago, trust was very local, right? I know you, you know me, okay? We live in the same locality. I trust you, and therefore, I can loan you some money, knowing that you would return it to me when it's time, right? As economies grew, as we moved out, of our small tribes and villages, etc., we started putting our trust in intermediaries, in middlemen, okay? So now you have these banking institutions, these stock brokerages, Okay, you have the governments that have now become the custodians of the transactions that are happening between me and you. You're still my friend, okay? But if I have to transfer money to you, it happens through a bank, okay? And this actually, the way it has evolved over time, okay, and the more trust that we have started placing in intermediaries has started coming at a cost, right? So these intermediaries, in order to help us with the transactions, have now started levying a cost for their services, okay? And as they start monopolizing the areas in which they operate, they also start restricting access, right? And we have seen how some of these establishments have grown so big that today the currency that they are managing and those transactions that they're keeping track of is a kind of currency that you and I had not bargained for, which is digital data. Whose data is it? Our data. But who's controlling it? Who is owning it? These intermediaries. Okay? So trust, has been put in these intermediaries, and in the process, we are paying a high cost for it. Okay? And that became even more apparent for those of you who remember the financial crisis in 2008. Okay? That is where, when we saw these huge financial establishments crumbling down, okay, we saw that the trust that we had put in got eroded. Okay? Here we were thinking all this while, okay, that the intermediaries are keeping us honest. The kind of transactions, the records that they are keeping, okay? And this is how society has evolved, right? Right from the earlier, Babylonian civilizations where perhaps you were recording these on tablets, okay? It has evolved where we are now recording them, through proper bookkeeping, okay? And bookkeeping is something that evolved in the 1400s because we needed to keep track of the transactions that are happening. Why? Is it okay for me to just write, the cash flow every day in terms of, what happened? It's okay, if it's just at a personal level. But for a business to understand how they're doing, okay, there was that little bit of balancing that they had to do. So for every credit, there is a debit. For every asset, there is a liability. And that is really the origin of how this double entry record keeping came about. And it is something that has continued to happen, okay? So there are these intermediaries that are keeping track of those transactions for us in terms of which assets do I actually own, who owes me what, and what is it that I owe somebody, okay? So these are the transactions that are being kept track of. Now, okay, imagine a world where we do not have any of these intermediaries. And why are we even looking at such a world? What is the advantage of such a world? Okay? Look at the situation today where we have these middlemen, we have these intermediaries, but what is really happening is that you are having a whole section of society that is not included. Okay? There are millions of people out there that do not have access to, let's say, a bank account, okay? And many of these intermediaries today have become gatekeepers, okay? In terms of looking at, what assets you own, what is your identity, etc., etc., okay? Now, how can we look at a world where we can ensure that trust is at a different level, we bring it back to a point where we don't need any intermediaries. And that really is the promise of blockchain, okay? So trust today has evolved, okay? And the reason why I'm, talking so much about trust is that that is really the basis of blockchain, okay? Today, when you look around, we have started trusting strangers. Have you ever had a shared Uber ride? Okay? Have you gone and stayed in an Airbnb, or have you let your house out, to Airbnb? We are going to trust strangers, right, to come and use our place, and we are going to use somebody else's place. I remember years ago, before Airbnb made it so big, there was something else that was similar, which was called couch surfing. Okay, and I was honestly horrified when someone even suggested that I could go and just rent a couch in some stranger's place. But look at how our society is evolving. Okay, today we're comfortable with the concept of an Airbnb. In fact, we prefer that to hotels. And somebody was saying that, and it was in, I think, one of the TED Talks I had heard, they were talking about how we are so much more careful when we are at an Airbnb and we are on our best behavior as compared to living in a hotel, where you may just, toss that towel on the floor despite them telling you, let's be green and, can you please hang up? We just don't care, right? But the same thing, when you're staying in somebody else's house, you're going to be that much more careful because you're being rated, okay? Your reputation is at stake. So just as you are rating your Ola drivers and Uber drivers, I have seen that they have to rate their guests as well. Okay? So now this whole reputation has come into the picture, which was the original trust we were talking about when we were living in these smaller communities, right? If I owed somebody money and I didn't return it to them, the whole village would know. Okay, it was my reputation. Okay? So today we are getting back to that level where we're talking about trust among a whole bunch of strangers, okay, to keep everybody honest. And that, as I said, is the promise of blockchain. So Gartner says that the value of business that we are going to do via the blockchain is going to be something like 3.1 trillion by 2030, not a long time away. Okay? And we've also seen a huge interest in a number of industries, a lot of companies that are, if not actually doing something on blockchain, at least doing a lot of research. There are a lot of patents that are coming out, in terms of what one can do in terms of the possibilities. The possibilities are immense, okay? And if you look at the entire blockchain, it's a whole distributed ledger of transactions. Now you may think, is that what it is? So much of a hue and cry and so much of interest around blockchain, and is it something as dull as just accounting? Okay, it's a fair question to ask, okay? But that accounting is important. Otherwise, how else would we know that Mukesh Ambani is the richest Indian, okay? Or that, India's GDP is 8.2, okay? There is value, in having these transactions recorded, okay? And, hopefully in a way that is a lot more inclusive without it, becoming a monopoly of a few intermediaries. So, if we look at some of the fundamentals, okay, at the heart of it all, a blockchain, okay, is a distributed ledger, a huge digital ledger, okay, and it works on a complete concept of decentralization. That means there is no central organization that is managing your transactions, okay? It is distributed across the entire network that is participating in that blockchain, okay? Now, the advantage of doing that is it ensures that everybody in that network is able to view the transaction, okay? If you think about a distributed network, just imagine you're in a forest, okay, and there are multiple cameras and there is a tree that falls down. So many cameras have recorded that event of the tree falling down, okay? Why it fell, we don't know, but that event has been recorded, okay? So it is the same when you have a distributed network. Okay, there are all these computers on the network that are going to vouch that that transaction has taken place. Okay, now the transaction and the mechanism by which the blockchain works ensures that once that block has been created, which represents the transaction, okay, it is done in such a way by applying cryptography that it becomes immutable. You cannot change it after that, okay? And there are algorithms that ensure that there are certain hash functions so that if the input is this, the output will only be this, okay? If you so much as change one letter in it, it is going to bring the output into a completely different string of characters that will immediately let the network know that somebody is tampering with this record, okay? And again, it is about reputation, and you wouldn't do that, okay? This is the collective strength of a crowd, okay? So Bitcoin, while it has been the first, well-known use case of a blockchain, it works precisely on that, okay? You have all these thousands of computers that are on that network that are watching everything that is happening, and they provide the computing power, because every transaction is going to be there on every single node on the network, right? So they are providing the computing power, they're providing the storage. So what is in it for them? What is in it, for somebody who has a computer, okay, to be in this network, okay? That is where, in the Bitcoin world at least, I'm not equating blockchain Bitcoin, but in the Bitcoin world, okay, the motivation for them is for them to be able to participate, validate a transaction by performing some very complex computation, and by doing so, and if they're the first to do so, they get to mine some Bitcoins, okay? They get paid for it. And that is really, how it works. And imagine if there are so many nodes, okay, how easy it is for somebody to hack the information if they have to hack the information out of every node in that, okay? We know that there have been enough situations where we have seen hackers being very active, but that is typically where the information is sourced in some central databases here and there. But if this is now distributed across thousands of nodes, okay, it would be practically impossible for somebody to be able to do it across, okay? And if somebody has to forge or participate in some kind of corruptive practices, they will have to be the majority, right? And when you're having so many computers across, how do you then become that majority to be able to go and forge that information? It's a beautiful way to do it. And interestingly, the first blockchains we started seeing around, especially around cryptocurrency, was right after the 2008 crash, okay? It has, a person or a group of people actually came up with it, and it's pretty anonymous, although there is a name to it, okay? And the way today we see the applications of it go far beyond just looking at, cryptocurrency. So nodes that form a very important part of the network, decentralization, which is the very premise of blockchain, a distributed ledger, as I said, it is not a centralized ledger. You have public networks, which is what blockchain is based on. You also have private networks, which is how blockchain will work in the industry, right? Which means they are permission networks. Anybody cannot be on that network. You will need to have permission to participate in that particular network. And it works on consensus, where every node that is participating in that blockchain, there is a consensus that this transaction has happened. Okay, so you cannot change the record. However, you can transfer the ownership, in which case it will become another blockchain, okay? And because these blocks are linked to each other, that's why it's called a blockchain. So you have that complete history. So imagine, how different it would be, when we will not have to contest whether, this particular property is really mine, or there are 10 others taking a claim to it, okay? the potential is absolutely immense, and because these records are so immutable, okay, it adds that element of security that we have known, come to know that it's not always possible when you have a centralized kind of a ledger. You also have smart contracts today where you can put in certain programming rules, certain conditions about a certain event that has to happen if this event has happened, okay? And that helps us to actually make sure that we can actually practically put some of the applications of blockchain to real use, especially if you are, let us say, for example, buying, selling stocks in the market based on a certain condition that is being met. So, if someone wants to register a transaction, okay, the transaction gets represented as a block in a shared ledger. So when I say shared ledger, the transaction is going to be available, that block is going to be available on every node in the network, okay? Now it is broadcast to all the participants, and then the participants approve the transaction, and that way they are providing consensus, okay? Then the block gets added to the chain. In the Bitcoin world, it happens at 10-minute intervals. So imagine the kind of power that some of the computers need to have to be able to solve some of those really complex computation, to be able to. In fact, they say that the number of computers that today are, in the cryptocurrency world, if you put all, the large 500 banks put together, they don't have that much of computing power in terms of how much is available, and that's the reason it's caught the imagination of so many people, right? And once the block is added to the chain, you have a uniform view that is available across the network in terms of, what all the authorized participants in terms of being able to view what is done. Now, blockchain has immense potential and it is disrupting industries, okay? Just think about any industry. I have just put a few up out here. Let us look at education, for example. Today we have, besides your universities, today you have a plethora of online, distance learning, so many courses, right? Now, what if all the education records, you must be doing a whole bunch of certifications as well that are available, from an Amazon, from a Red Hat, and you could have access to all that information, all your education records available in the blockchain that could be available for verification to anybody that you are authorizing, right? Imagine how easy the whole process of background verification is going to happen, for the people who are in the business of talent acquisition in HR, in companies, right? Imagine, how social media will change. Today, thanks to social media, we have a lot of information available, right? The biggest challenge for so much of information being available is that how do you prove you own the content? It could be a photograph that you have taken, it could be some music that you have composed. Because everything is available for distribution so easily, how do you prove ownership? Okay, blockchains can help you do that. What about politics? Okay, voting. Today we're talking about tampering of votes. We're talking about, have you rigged some of the election, the voting machines, etc. But with blockchain, you could be able to, provide your vote very easily without having to go through any of these intermediaries. It could also help governments be a lot more transparent in some of the things that they do, in terms of some of the projects that they're undertaking, where the public will be able to view the exact progress of each of those transactions, right? Imagine if all our real estate records could be on blockchains, okay, where it would be very clear for us to be able to actually demonstrate our ownership of the properties that we own, without somebody else also claiming the same. Manufacturing. Imagine whole supply chain systems where you could keep track of right from the factory how goods are moving across the supply chain. That would make it so easy for everybody in that chain to be able to actually figure out, where exactly something is in the chain, right? Insurance companies, your health care, right from your life, birth, as well as through your entire life, okay? You could have all your health records on a blockchain so that in any emergency, no matter where you are in the world, doctors could be able to access the most relevant information. This is something that companies have been struggling for a long time. I remember working with a healthcare company a few years ago where they were wondering how on earth will we achieve that, because they had this vision back then in terms of having a single place where you could find all the records, the health records, right? But the question always was, who owns that data? Okay? I think today, with the kind of disruption that we are seeing in our lives and with our entire life story available in the digital world, I think it has become increasingly clear that our data we own. Okay? We own our data. And if we can control who can view that data and who has access to the data via a blockchain, where it's very clear, right? I want to do a transaction with you. As per cryptography, your public key is something, my public key is something that people will be able to see. However, okay, it's only when I use my private key that I will be able to digitally sign it to say that this is uniquely mine. Okay, so several industries are getting disrupted. There is a lot of interest, and as with any disruption, and Pamela spoke earlier about the hockey stick effect, right? We have seen disruption in India that nobody had believed was possible some years ago, right? Who would have believed that mobile technology would take off in such a big way that today it has, disrupted at least 4 or 5 other areas, right? Today, besides it being your telephone, it's also your camera, it's also your mechanism for, all the transactions that you're doing. Look at how many things it has disrupted, from the traditional way that we were doing things. And for a lot of people, and I happened to also be in that India Mobile Congress that, Pamela was talking about, we are talking about the mobile phone today being accessible to just about every Indian, okay? You can get a reasonably good smartphone for a low price, and it's changing things. So imagine if Internet of Technology today, where you have billions of connected devices, has become the norm, and if we have to do a lot of gadget-to-gadget transactions, how difficult it would be if every time you had to go through some intermediaries to perform those transactions. It would be so inefficient. So the efficiency component, the bringing back of trust, in a collective and a collaborative environment without intermediaries is really something that is going to disrupt industries, and a number of them that are today already so well established that they are actually becoming the earliest adopters because they need to really see how this would work. Okay? I recently read that HSBC performed their first blockchain transaction when they issued one of those letters of credit to Reliance Industries. Okay? And if they're able to do that, imagine you would not have the kind of fraud cases that we had seen in recent times where some people in the system had forged certain documents that allowed it to look like there was a proper letter of credit given to certain industrialists when it had not actually been approved, okay, by the senior management. Now that would be practically impossible to do in a blockchain era. So what is the way forward? Okay, as with any disruption, okay, and we've seen a lot of it. I think our generation has seen a lot of disruption, and all of the disruption has been brought by a lot of technology, okay? And we have, I think, developed the skills and the expertise to be able to cope with this kind of disruption. And hopefully, that is what will see us through, as we see this whole area of blockchain, which is so interconnected with other related, technologies that, we are seeing in the market. Together, they will create a completely new era of, and the entire economic structure of the way we are going about our business today. And it's going to be a very interesting time, and I'm sure, it will happen in our time. As much as there is a little bit of that reluctance, a little bit of that not wanting to let go of their control, that you will see a lot of establishments that will struggle with. But this is something that will happen sooner than later, and therefore, for all of us to be able to understand this entire space will become absolutely important. Somebody was telling me recently that blockchain developer, is increasingly a sought-after skill. Okay, so there is opportunity, right? I couldn't even imagine when I started my career if I saw anything, even closely, closer to what we hear today as, Android developer or blockchain developer, or, if anybody had even described anything like this to me 20 years ago, I would have thought it was the stuff of, some great science fiction. But today we're seeing a lot of that changing, and we have the resilience, we will grow with this, and we will embrace this just as we will, and as we have with every other technology of our times. So that's all I had. Thank you very much.